So welcome to this video, and in this video we're going to quickly go over the basic Python knowledge that you need for your GCSEs. As you can see on the screen, I have this command print subscribe thanks. So this is the basic thing that you can do with Python, is basically print something onto the screen. So we're using an online IDE called Trinket. You can follow along as well. So this is how you print something. You basically pass in whatever you want to print in these speech marks. We're gonna talk about how you can store data into variables. So what a variable is, just like a data location where you can set things into it. So let's say A, and let's set A equal to 5 and B equal to 10. Then we can do things like we can add them, you can times them, divide them, do whatever. You can do all the mathematical operations on it. C equals A plus B. C will have the number 15 inside, and we can see that by printing C. As you can see, 15 is there. We could have also, instead of this, we could have just printed out A plus B, which will give us the same thing. Notice here we don't use speech marks here because it's not like a string. So a string is basically something that's in quotation marks. So maybe like ring or something like that. That's in quotation marks. But this is an integer. Python automatically knows if it's an integer or a string or whatever. So we can also multiply them using the star. We can also put an exponent of 2. So if we do a to the power of 2, we need double 2 and double star 2, which will give us 5 squared, which is 25. We can also do divide, which will give us 2.5. I think double divide basically gives the whole number. Yep, excluding the decimal point. Now we can talk about using different data types. So let's say we have C equal to a string, which is maybe hello. If we print C, we'll get a hello. Now, how do we join these three together? The way that we can do this is using a technique called concatenation. This is something that you need to know. Concatenation basically means we can add plus A, but because C is not the same data type as A, remember C is a string. So to fix that, we can basically cast our integer into a string. So by doing str and then passing A inside. Now we can have hello 5. And we could also do the same with B and do this. But you can't really change the integer, a string into an integer, because that doesn't really make sense. Now let's move on to the most useful thing that you're going to be using in all your pseudocode or all your Python questions, which is how to get input from the user. So the way that we can do this is basically we set a variable name, let's say A equals, then we're going to use input and whatever your question is. So maybe enter a number. So now if we run it, we're going to get enter a number, and if we put a number like 5, now it's going to get stored into the variable A, which we can then print out. So if we put 5, we get 5 back, because that's basically, it gets stored into here. This is how you get input from the user. Also, a good technique is to basically cast it in whatever type you're asking for. So in this case, we're using an integer, so we got to cast it into a int. And now we can put 5. There we go. Now maybe we can get 2 and change this into a B and enter your second number. And now we can do something like A plus B, which if we put 10 and maybe 20, we should get 30. And we do indeed get 30. But yeah, this is how you can get the input from a user. Maybe instead of an int, we can also have a string. And we can also have a float. We can also have a real, which is basically, a real is basically like a decimal number. And a float is also a decimal number. But you can use them interchangeably. And Boolean is the last type, which is only true and false. That's the 4 main types of cost too. Now we can talk about loops. So what is a loop? Well, you should know from your programming constructs that that's one of the programming construct called iteration. Iteration means that you can repeat a block of code for however many times you want. So the way that we can do this, imagine we want to print subscribe like 10 times. The way that we can do this is using a for loop. A for loop is a count controlled loop which we can set like the starting and the end point. The endpoint is exclusive. We don't include the endpoint. So we do this by doing for I in range, the start, which if we don't put a start, it will automatically put 0, and the end one, which maybe we can say 10. And now followed by a colon. Now we got to indent this, and this will print it out 10 times, but like it will go from 0 to 9, if that makes sense. And as you can see, it prints 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times. Now, this variable here, I, is like a variable, and basically it's like a count. So every time, behind the scenes, this starts off at 0. And also, if I put a 0 here, it doesn't really make a difference. This is the start, this is the end. And also, this goes from 0, then the next time it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 3, and whatever. We can see this by doing a bit of concatenation. If we put I here and plus. Remember, because this is a string data type, we need to stringify or cast it into a string. Now we should see the number printed out. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 until 9. If you want it to be like 1 to 10, we can basically just add 1 here and it should fix the problem. But intuitively, the for loop goes from 0 to like 9. Also, one other thing is that you can add a third thing here, which is basically like a step. So currently default goes up by 1, but we can change that to maybe if we want to go backwards, or if we want to go in increments of 2 or 3. Let's just do 3, and let's see what I is. So as you can see, it only goes from 0, 3, 6, and 9. So yeah, we can also have it go from like 10 to 0, but remember, it doesn't include 0. So it'll go to 1. So to fix that, we go to -1, so it goes to 0. And we'll do -1, because this time we're going to go backwards. And as you can see, it goes from 10 to 0. Or we could have just done 9, so it prints it out 10 times. A common way of using loops are basically to go through like an array, which we'll come to in a bit. So this is the first type, or called the count controlled loop. And there's another type, which is the condition controlled loop, which is basically a while loop. This is what most students really find difficult, is because like while loop, you have a condition. Usually we don't know the condition, but we can basically do the same thing. Let me not remove that. We can basically do the same as going from 0 to 10. Let's just leave it as the default one. And let's convert this into like a while loop. So while now we need a condition which needs to be true in order for the loop to go. So outside the loop, we're going to initialize a variable. Let's just call it x equals 0. Now, since x is, when do we want to stop the loop? Well, when x becomes 10, right? Or 9. So we can basically do less than 10 or less than or equal to 9. And while that's true, we basically print whatever the value of x is. Remember, stringify it, and plus subscribe. Now, in the first iteration, x is going to be 0. 0 is less than 10. And then we print 0 plus subscribe. And then nothing is really happening. X is still becoming 0 because it won't automatically increment like how it did with the for loop. So we need to increment the x counter. We can do this by doing x equals x plus 1. Or a shorthand of this is x plus equals 1. And now it should do the same thing as what we did in the for loop. And as you can see, it basically does the same thing. This is the difference between a while loop and a for loop. With a while loop, we would only use it if we have like a condition. Maybe while the input of whatever they say is not equal to a certain thing, then we can execute this or something like that. But yeah, this is the brief overview of a while loop and versus a for loop. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the second programming construct, which is branching or selection. Selection is basically your if statements, which are always used in programming. This is very important that you know. So let's say like let's use everything that we've learned so far. So let's get input from the user and let's check if it's a certain thing or not. So let's say name equals input, enter a name, and then if they put, so if statement is like, if it's this, then we do this, otherwise we do this. That's basically what we're going to do here. So if name is equal, now we use a double equals to compare a, we can basically say print invalid or something like that. Maybe it's a checker, and otherwise we can let it print to valid. So now if we test this and we write a, we should get invalid because that's what we put here. Otherwise, if we put something else, it will say valid. Now, with the else, we can also have like an elif. That's like a different condition. So elif, maybe name is equal to b. Then we can say valid. Otherwise, we can say print, maybe try again. And if we put a, we should get invalid. If we put b, we should get valid. And if we put c, we should get try again. So yeah, this is how you would do your selection. As well as having if statements, we also have like a case or a switch case, which basically you can think of it of like cases. So like switch name, right? Case, the first case, if the name is like a, we can do the same thing and print valid or invalid. Case like b, like you're just basically listing all the possible cases, and print valid. And case c, we can say try again. Now if we run it, it should work. Python basically doesn't have like a switch case, so we basically use a match instead. But in your pseudocode for OCR, it says switch, and it's basically the same thing. Okay, now we're going to move on to your favorite topic, which is arrays. Initialize like an array with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we can basically use what we done in for loops and let's iterate through this array. So you can do this by doing for I in range, starting from 0 to the correct way of doing it is to use the length function of a, which basically if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we should go to 5, but remember it goes from 0 to 4. And we do print a at position I, and it should print all the numbers here. So if we change this one to maybe 6, as you can see, it prints all the things. This is how you would go through all the elements in an array. Also, if you want to change a value at a certain index, we just do this by doing 0 and 2. So this would be 0, 1, 2. So we want to change that 3 into a, let's say 5, and print a. we have 5 over here. You should also bear in mind that you can't add things to an array. Arrays are immutable. Once you set the length, it has to stay the same. Also, if you want to remove something, I mean, again, you can't really do it. Okay, so now let's talk about functions. So what is a function? Function is like a subroutine. A subroutine is basically a separate piece of code that's in the main program. So I'll show you what I mean. So in the main program, imagine we have a equals 5, b equals 6. And now let's define a function. So the way that we can do this is using def and followed by the name of the function that you want. So let's just say area. And for now, we're gonna print out something. So area. So now, if we want to call it, we call it in the main function, and we just do that by just saying the thing followed by the brackets. And if we do that, we get area. Now, we can also pass in things as parameters. This is what we call when we have something here. So let's say x and y are parameters of area. Now, whatever we put in here in the call function, that's called the argument. So let's say we want 5 and 10, and we want it to basically calculate the area. So area equals x times y, and let's return, actually let's just print area. And now if we do this, we should get 50. As you can see, this is like a separate piece of code. This has nothing to do with this, right? This is like in the main function. So yeah, this has nothing to do with this, and you can basically just pass in whatever values here. We can do this so many times. Maybe we can put in 4 and 20 and it should work. So using a function, basically you can reuse it multiple times without worrying about if it's going to break your program or not. And it just promotes, instead of copying and pasting this code multiple times, the thing inside, we're basically using reusable components in programming, which is always a good thing in programming. Even though this is a function, it's like a procedure because we're not really returning. A function, we would return a value, so return area. And forget that. This time we're going to return the area. And now we can store this area into a value. So not x, but let's just say z. Now we can print the value of z, which is still going to be 50. So that's something we can't do with a procedure. So if we have the code we had for the procedure, and if we did the same thing, z equals that and print z, the reason why we got 50 is because it's printing. Printing is not the same as returning. And the reason why we did get none is because there's nothing to return. The function is not returning anything. That's why we get none. And now let's talk about substrings and how to manipulate strings. So if we have the string subject equals computer science. If we have the subject a string, we can keep a string as an array. So if we do subject and pass in 1 and we print that, we should get 0 and 1. So O should be printed out, as you can see. And if we do maybe 10, it should print out C. I think that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this one. Also remember the space is an index as well. So we can basically apply everything we know for arrays to a string. And in particular, we can do the length of subject. Actually, let me length of the subject, which is 16, which if you do count it, it will be 16. We can also get a subpart of it. The way that we can do this is, I've actually missed that in the array section, but we can also get a substring of the thing. So subject, and now we're going to use something called slicing. So slicing is basically, but you see what I mean. This starts off at index position 1, so 0, 1, and this ends, but remember, same as for loops, it doesn't include 3, it just goes up to 3, so it'll actually be until 2. So 2 is 0, 1, 2, so M. So OM should be printed, as you can see. Now if we extend that to 5, we should get omp2. So this is how you can get basically a substring of the string. And it's the same for arrays as well. So if we just have an example array, a equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if we do the same thing, maybe 3, you should see that we get 2 and 3, because that's 0, 1, and 3 is the second one. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is that you need to know for GCSE computer science. And comment down below the word trinket if you've made it this far in the video. Hopefully you learned something, and if I've missed anything, leave it down below and I'll go through it in the next video.